to Australia, I'm going to tell you now, it comes from Dravidic India. Have you ever heard that?
No.
I've heard that something
you
to
have
do with the
Cambell?
languages. I've heard that there's a language.
Yes, there's linguistic studies now that show the ancient Vedic Sanskrit, the language that was spoken when they read Sanskrit is very similar to the old Aboriginal syllables. The way their sentence structure, syntax, all that. It's very interesting. There is now DNA evidence. There is now DNA evidence.
Looks similar, don't they, to Aboriginals? Maybe not the same colouring, but physically they are kind of, you know, tall and thin.
They're identical. They're identical.
Okay,
I don't know why I don't know why anybody has never made the connection before. I don't know why, because the Dravidian India was
dark Indian, yeah, for sure.
Yes, it's the dark Indian. There was always two cultures in India. One was light, one was very light colored, almost Mediterranean, almost Near Eastern, and the Dravidians were always very, very dark and black, and they were only in the southern half of India, close to Australia. So look, there is now DNA evidence. It's no longer theoretical. There's DNA evidence, according to scientists in India, that the ancient Dravidians are indeed linked to the Aboriginals of Australia. There are writers who are now claiming Dravidians departed India about 4,000 years ago and arrived to Australia. But the problem is the world changed and there was no way they could get back. There was no going back home. They were stuck there. So whether they joined with the Aboriginals that were already in Australia is a very distinct possibility, or if they remain distinct, it's just not known. Now, this would have been easy for the vapor canopy because it was a drier world. From India to Australia, 99% of the journey was an overland trek. Look at these maps. Look at this.
Wow. Wow, okay.
You can see where Australia is?
Yeah.
Yep.
There's not a single bit of water between Australia and India.
Yep.
You see that continent, Lemuria, way out in the Pacific?
Yes.
Where Eastern Island was? That means really close to Australia was a whole other supercontinent.
Yes.
This is what would happen if you pull all the water back and put it back in the mesosphere where it started. Way 3.5 miles up, way up there, an ocean, a whole layer of atmosphere that's actually an ocean.
So would they have
put
been
that water back
people as well?
Yeah, during the vapor canopy, everything. Yeah, I have videos on my channel that explain the scientific research of the Creation Research Institute from Glen Rose, Texas. They built a biosphere and they replicated vapor canopy conditions, and they made fruit flies, roaches, and beetles grow 3 times their normal size and live 3 times longer.
Wow.
Okay. They did that in Texas. They did that in Texas.
That's like the opposite to our theory, Cambell, because we were looking at it being an impact of the sun, that people grew bigger, like as in plants today, and put them in the shade, they grow smaller. But the canopy, there's no sun in that. It's just a very thick sort of biosphere, I guess. So that brings up a change in the atmosphere. Yeah.
So actually, under the vapor canopy conditions, the scientists in Texas were also surprised to find out that plants grow better in the dark under that ultraviolet light that would have passed through the vapor canopy than direct sunlight, which harms them.
Wow, that's like the opposite to what we've been saying, Cambell. That's so interesting. Excellent. Yeah, okay.
So we continue with the Vedic deal because look, there's let me see here. There's a passage. Listen, there's a passage in the Vedic Ramayana that a bridge was formed between India and Sri Lanka years ago, made by monkeys. It was made by monkeys. Now, it doesn't sound like that would relate to Australia, but check this out. I'm convinced the locals saw monkeys using a natural land bridge to pass between the two land masses, and it was just assumed by the locals that monkeys made it. They probably just seen monkeys going out there in the ocean and then coming back. Well, whatever. And then that's what they assumed, and this tradition grew up out of that. But this is only referenced here to show that land bridges are indeed mentioned in ancient texts of India. That's just one text. But the ancient texts of India are rife with empires and kingdoms and land masses that were off their coast that totally disappeared. Much of the Vedic literature is about these civilizations that are now underwater. And this passage from southern India to Australia over natural land bridges, when the sea level was much lower due to a vapor canopy, it's confirmed in two amazing finds that I've come across. You guys might know more, but there may be more. But statues found in Australia greatly resemble two Vedic deities. One is Hanuman and one is unmistakably Ganesh, the elephant deity. Let me show you. These are found in Australia. These are Vedic statues. This is the artwork of ancient India. The elephant is Ganesh, Ganesh, and the other one is Hanuman.
Where were they found, Jason?
You know, I don't know what this place is called, but it's called the Gimpy district of Queensland.
Gimpy. There's a pyramid in Gimpy. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, it says they were excavated in Gimpy, and I thought y'all would like that. But I wanted to show that the archaeology confirms tradition, and tradition confirms the geography, and geography is confirmed by the genetic testing. Everything points to ancient India now.
Wow, fascinating. We have never had, we've had a few elders on the show, and no one's ever made a link to India ever, have they?
No,
well, that's a fascinating thing for us to talk to about
on
some of our indigenous.
Thinking because the Australian originals always say that they're the oldest civilization, but so does the Vedic tradition, right? They say the same thing.
They do say the same thing. They do say the same. Look, but the situation under the vapor canopy was more complex though than just land bridges. The legends and memories from that part of the world, the southern hemisphere, they're rife with stories of fantastic supercontinent, a kingdom called Lemuria, or a continent. Sometimes it's called Mu, other times in ancient Vedic texts it's called Kumari Kingdom, and it's a vast landmass that was populated by the ancient Tamil civilization. It's the Atlantis of the Pacific is what it is. Now, I'm going to show you this book. This book is by David Hatcher Childress. It documents a wide variety of artifacts, archaeological anomalies, legends, ancient texts. It's just fascinating. This is one of my favorite authors because he goes to the very places that he talks about. But this book needs to be read by everyone. Lost Cities of Ancient Lemuria in the Pacific. This book. Oh yes, hold on.
I've seen.
Oh, it'll focus in. It'll focus in.
Yep.
I don't know why my screen's not focusing right. There it is. There it is.
Yeah, we got it. We got it.
Right there. Screenshot that. One of the best books you'll ever read. Let me tell you something. This man will teach you things about New Zealand, Tasmania, and Australia you've never heard before. Yeah. No. This David Hatcher Childress wrote a fascinating book. But it's New Guinea, Australia, New Zealand, New Caledonia. Look, they were attached to the Tonga Islands, where there have been found massive dolmens, trilithons, ancient megalithic architecture, and islands that are isolated, and yet they're populated with people. Now, what I just showed you on this picture, New Caledonia, it has 400 unnatural hills made of ancient cement that remain a mystery. I'm going to show you this. This is a true archaeological find. This is vapor canopy technology here. I'm going to show you. You were talking about flight.
Yep.
Well, things that fly require power sources. So let me show you something. All that looks like to a casual observer in New Caledonia, all that looks like is 400 like tumuli, however you say it. These are hills. Now, it was very unusual, and for over 100 years, nobody really thought to even look at them because they thought they were burial grounds. That's what they thought they were. Somebody had buried giants, these big old hills, but that's not what they found. So when they found, I'm going to show you what they found. And what they found inside is so anomalous that they had to dig up another one. Then they dug up another one. Then they dug up over 40 of them, and they confirmed, okay, yeah, you know what? Every single one of these have the exact same construction inside. What hasn't been explained today is what the hell is it? I'm going to show you. Okay, this is one of the first illustrations done over 100 years ago of the inside of a hill. Now, somebody was very specific in putting, it was cement. They know it's cement because it has snail shells in it. It's been mixed. It's with lime and mortar. Somebody made this. The only problem is it's dated 5100 BC. It's dated 7,000 years ago. Now, all 400 hills look basically like this, but I'm going to go into more detail now. Later scientists went and looked at them, and they got a much better analysis. This is what they look like inside, each one of them, 400 of them. Now, that's anomalous. That's anomalous. But what's more mysterious is we have absolutely there's no traditions, there's no records of a civilization here in New Caledonia. And the excavations reveal cement cylinders laid in gravel, vertical, layered in rings of iron nodules. Listen, the discovery of these small snails proves that it's a mixture made by people, by men. There's nothing natural about this. The structuring of these mounds suspiciously looks just like the Baghdad battery found in Iraq, which actually produces 70 volts of electricity. And that's now. We don't know how much it did back then when you actually packed it with everything you needed for the compost. But here's 400 batteries, charging stations, way out in New Caledonia. Remember David Hatcher's theory about the Vimenas? They needed to charge and they needed to stop somewhere, and then before they made the trip all the way over the Pacific. So it's dated at 5100 BC, but this would be a vapor canopy type technology. I believe that discoverers pretty much know what it is, but it's so unbelievable they're not publishing it. So it's just
because
it's
there's
such
an
an anomaly.
island, isn't there? In I can't remember what the island is, but it's covered in jars.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah.
I've seen that too.
Could be the same kind of thing, possibly. Yeah. Wow.
So here's something really interesting. You remember you asked me a question. You asked me a question earlier. What time period are we looking at when we were talking about this disaster? And when they drew these giant agroglyphs, so because to them the gods had abandoned them and they totally left, so they were employing sympathetic magic to try to draw the gods back down. Okay, you asked me and I told you the date was 2647 BC, which was a phoenix year. It was a phoenix cataclysm. It was known to come, and that's why the elite vanished. They were gone, and they left behind all these other people to fend for themselves. Okay, you can imagine my surprise when I was basically just going through different websites, because I don't really use the internet for a source of material at all. But I was just going through different websites, seeing just basically what was the general creation story for the Aboriginals. What did they believe in their ancient past? Man, in my studies on Australia, I came across the research of scientists at the University of New South Wales. I didn't want to quote anybody outside of Australia. You know what I mean? I wanted to stick. These people would know best because they're there geographically there. So, but they had collected a lot of Aboriginal traditions and pieced together that basically the Aborigines had described to them a cataclysm involving the sun that happened 47 centuries earlier, and they described it as a fire devil that crashed to the earth. Now, this astonished them because, one, evidently the sun wasn't very well known, and it wasn't believed that anything could come from the sky that was fiery. Now, they don't ever say vapor canopy. They don't ever say that there was a firmament above made of all that water. But what these scientists have concluded makes sense. Why the Aborigines would have been in such disbelief that something made of fire could have fell from the sky. But the date was 47 centuries ago. That is within 30 years of 2647 BC when that Phoenix cataclysm could, when you're talking about scientific estimates, that's a bullseye, because most of the time in anthropology, they're going to say plus or minus 100 or 200 years. That's a scientific bullseye. This Aboriginal tradition about and to them, that would be the great disaster. Because remember now, put things into proper context. To the Aboriginal, the last great cataclysm was it during the vapor canopy when something fiery fell from the sky, caused a disaster, and all the individuals that they looked up to, builders of infrastructure, all what they considered was gods, vanished and left them and abandoned them. To them, that was their nightmare. But later, 552 years later, was the Great Flood, the day the sky fell, the collapse of the vapor canopy. But the Aboriginals didn't fear that date. There are no flood traditions in ancient Aboriginal deal. Why? What did I show you about Australia? Australia is like a refuge from cataclysm. It is the place you need to be when the Phoenix phenomenon does these major events all over the world. Australia is a haven. Aboriginals had no idea there was a great flood. There was a day the sky fell. They didn't know anything about it because Australia was unaffected. The absolute proof Australia was unaffected is the fact that there's over 200 and something species of marsupials that are there, cannot be found anywhere else in the entire world.
Nice.
So that's interesting because we've I've always understood that Australia sits on a very unique tectonic plate, and that we actually make up the ring of fire, and any sort of movement on these tectonic plates would cause massive, cataclysms around this continent. So massive floodings. So that sort of plate shift actually is protective for Australia, protects us versus breaking it apart.
Yeah, there's something about the geography. I mean, you saw that map when you add, look, 200. Look, if you just add 20 feet of sea level, do you have any idea how many cities around the world will be completely flooded out?
Destroyed,
whole subway systems and underground infrastructures, all their power, everything, telecommunications will be all completely knocked out. That's 20 feet of coastal cities all around the world. But Australia's barely affected. Even at 270 feet, the ocean level rises. So yeah, Australia has very unique geography.